All right, good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, depending on when you're listening to this or watching it. This is a reading brief number 2 for the Gateway Experience, Brain Hemisphere Synchronization in Perspective. We left off at the last reading 1 right here at number 5, Gateway and Hemisync, and that's just right where I'm going to pick up. Gateway and Hemisync. Now that we have briefly profiled the basic mechanics of the principal techniques for altering or expanding consciousness, which share some of the objectives and or methods employed in Gateway Experience, we may proceed to focus on what the technique actually involves. Fundamentally, the Gateway Experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres so as to alter consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. The participant then gains access to the various levels of intuitive knowledge which the universe offers. What differentiates the Gateway Experience from forms of meditation is its use of the Hemisync technique, which is defined in a monograph by Monroe Institute trainer Melissa Yeager as a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both hemispheres are simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency. Although Hemisync seems to be rather rare and of only short duration in ordinary human consciousness, Melissa Yeager states that audio techniques developed by Bob Monroe can induce and sustain Hemisync with the Institute's basic Focus 3 tapes. She also notes that studies conducted by Elmer and Alice Green at the Menninger Foundation have shown that a subject with 20 years of training in Zen meditation could consistently establish Hemisync at will, sustaining it for over 15 minutes. Dr. Stuart Twemlow, a psychiatrist and research associate of the Monroe Institute, reports that in our own studies of the effect of the Monroe tape system on brainwaves, we have found that the tapes encourage the focusing of brain energy. In parentheses, it can be measured as with a light bulb in watts, and into a narrower and narrower frequency band. So in our studies of the effect of the Monroe Institute tapes on brainwaves, we have found that the tapes encourage the focusing of brain energy into a narrower and narrower frequency band. This focusing of energy is not unlike the yoga concept of one-pointedness, which we may translate in Western terms as a single-mindedness. Dr. Twemlow goes on to observe that as the individual gets into the tapes beyond Focus 3, there is a gradual increase in brain size, or brain wave size, which is a measure of brain energy or power. Lamp versus laser. Melissa Yeager uses a metaphor to help clarify the process involved in the use of Hemisync in the Gateway Experience. She points out that the human mind in its natural state may be likened to an ordinary lamp which expends energy in the form of both heat and light, but in a chaotic, incoherent way which diffuses its energy over a wide area of rather limited depth. On the other hand, the human mind under the discipline of Hemisync acts after the fashion of a laser beam which produces a disciplined stream of light. The stream of energy is projected with total coherence of both frequency and amplitude, such that the surface area of a laser beam contains billions of times the concentrated energy found in a similar surface area on the sun. Gateway assumes that once the frequency and amplitude of the human brain are rendered coherent, it is possible to begin accelerating both so that the human mind is soon resonating at higher vibrational levels. The mind can then bring itself into synchronization with more sophisticated and rarefied energy levels in the universe. The mind, when operating at these increasingly rarefied levels, is assumed to be capable of processing the information thus received through the same fundamental matrix by which it makes sense of ordinary physical sensory input to achieve meaning in a cognitive context. Such meaning is usually perceived visually in the form of symbols, but may also be perceived as astonishing flashes of holistic intuition, or even in the form of scenarios involving both visual and oral perception. The mechanics by which the mind exercises the consciousness function will be addressed in more detail later in this paper. I have a few comments I'd love to make just basically on how, we have technology now in the consumer market that I think is deliberately deployed to disrupt this ability, but let's continue. At this point, I'm sure anyone who might be following these understands my position on that. Frequency following response. To achieve synchronization of brain hemispheres, the hemisync technique takes advantage of a phenomenon known as the frequency following response, FFR, which means that if a subject hears a sound produced at a frequency which emulates one of those associated with the operation of the human brain, the brain will try to mimic the same frequency pattern by adjusting its brain output. Therefore, if the subject is in a fully awake state, but hears sound frequencies which approximates brainwave output into the theta level, the subject's brain will endeavor to alter its brainwave pattern from the normal beta to the theta. Since the theta level is associated with sleep, the subject concerned may progress from a fully awake to a sleep state, provided that he does not consciously resist, as the brain strives to entrain its wave frequency output with the one which the person hears. Since these brainwave frequencies are outside the spectrum of sounds which can be heard in pure form by the human ear, hemisync must produce them based on another phenomenon known as the brain's capacity for deducing beat frequencies. If the human brain is exposed to one frequency in the left ear, which is 10 Hz below another audible frequency played in the right ear, rather than hearing either of the two audible frequencies, the brain chooses to hear the difference between them, the beat frequency. Thus availing itself of the FFR phenomena and using the technique of beat frequencies, the gateway system uses hemisync and other audio techniques employing the FFR phenomena to introduce a variety of frequencies which are played at a virtually subliminal, marginally audible level. The object is to relax the left hemisphere of the brain, place the physical body in a virtual sleep state, and bring the left and right hemispheres into coherence under conditions designed to promote production of ever higher amplitude and frequency of brainwave output. Audible and perhaps subliminal suggestions by Bob Monroe accompany the various brainwave frequencies, which are sometimes rolled in together with other sounds, such as surf, to mask the sound frequencies where desirable. So they would lace the syncing process with sounds of nature. In this way, Gateway endeavors to provide the subject with the tools by which he may alter his consciousness based on his own volition over time through the repetitive use of the tapes so as to access, via intuitive means, new categories of information not available to ordinary consciousness. So as I was nearing the end of the previous video, reading 1 for the synchronization, gateway synchronization perspective, I mentioned the MK Ultra torture training and the what's known as the water torture or the drip torture. This is a variation of that where they've inverted it into a positive mechanism. I'm not saying they were influenced by it. Perhaps they were. These same people may have had this research available to them as well that was related to MK Ultra, MK Delta, and so forth. But the picture I would like to paint is that it's like each ear is used as a dial. And because each ear is connected to each hemisphere of the brain, they essentially start off with audible noises that you may not acknowledge at first, but through slowly synchronizing them and you trying to focus on them consciously and unconsciously, they kind of align you, and they align your brainwave patterns by dialing you in. Here's a good word: role of resonance. However, brain coherence through entrainment to beat frequencies introduced via stereo headphones is only part of the reason why the gateway system works. It is also designed to achieve the physical quietude characteristics of deep transcendental meditative states, which brings about a complete alteration of the fundamental resonance pattern associated with the sound frequencies produced by the human body. Yoga, Zen, or transcendental meditation, if practiced long enough, will produce a change in the sound frequency with which the human heart resonates through the entire body. According to Bentov, this change is resonance results from elimination of what the medical profession calls the bifurcation echo, so that the sound of the heartbeat can move synchronously up and down the circulatory system in harmonious resonance approximately 7 times a second. I guess that's a wave measuring blood flow, and they're implying that that might take 7 seconds for full circulation. Bentov describes the role played by the bifurcation echo as follows. When the left ventricle of the heart ejects blood, the aorta, being elastic, balloons out just beyond the valve and causes a pressure pulse to travel down along the aorta. When the pressure pulse reaches the bifurcation in the lower abdomen, which is where the aorta forks into two and go into the legs, part of the pressure pulse rebounds and starts traveling up the aorta. If in the meantime the heart ejects more blood and a new pressure pulse is traveling downward, these two pressure points will eventually collide somewhere along the aorta and produce an interference pattern. By placing the body in a sleep-like state, the gateway tapes achieve the same goal as meditation in that it places the body in such a profoundly relaxed state that the bifurcation echo slowly fades away as the heart lessens the force and frequency with which it pushes blood into the aorta. The result is a regular, rhythmic sine wave pattern of sound which echoes throughout the body and rises up into the head in sustained resonance. The amplitude of this sine wave pattern, when measured with a sensitive seismograph type of instrument, is about 3 times the average of the sound volume produced by the heart when it is operating normally. So it's not, as I just tried to speculate on, it doesn't seem to be, I guess it is, it's like, imagine yourself laying perfectly flat, dead level, so to speak, and your blood is able to move perfectly back and forth at a synchronous rate through your body, and somehow the beat of your heart or the pumping of it is so controlled and so moderate that it doesn't actually provide another beat until the blood has hit your toes and started to come backwards up again for a recirculation. And that's to put this in other terms, when you're overexcited, as we've heard and read in other documents, the arousal issue, both, and when I say arousal, I don't mean to imply sexual arousal only, just any arousal, fear, war theater, the things that were described in the first reading through of cryptological aspects of ESP. So this research, although coming specifically from the Army, may be informed by obvious research from SRI or even NSA research prior to that. We've also read in other documents, and I've mentioned this before on online forums, that we cannot forget how many hospitals with both religious and scientific institutions, before this became a practice within the military for research, there was just as many experiments being done. There are probably a number of private libraries, whether they're family-owned or institutionally owned through the medical community, that have a lot of information that relate to these kinds of things. Brain stimulation. Bentov's biomedical model shows that this resonance is of considerable importance since it is directly transmitted to and impacts upon the brain. The resulting vibration is received and transmitted into the brain itself via the fluid-filled third and left ventricles located above the brainstem. An electromagnetic pulse is then generated, which stimulates the brain to raise the amplitude of the frequency of brainwave output. Just as Dr. Twemlow observed in his research on the effects of the Hemisync tapes, also, the brain is contained in a tight membrane called the dura, which is, in turn, cushioned by a thin layer of fluid located between it and the skull. As the coherent resonance produced by the human heart in a state of profound relaxation reaches the fluid layer surrounding the brain, it sets up a rhythmic pattern in which the brain moves up and down approximately 0.005 to 0.010 millimeters in a continuous pattern. The self-reinforcing character of resonant behavior accounts for the body's ability to sustain this movement despite the minimal level of energy involved. In this way, the entire body, based on its own micromotion, functions as a tuned vibrational system which transfers energy in a range of between 6.8 and 6.5 hertz into the Earth's ionospheric cavity, which itself resonates at about 7 to 7.5 hertz. Of this process, Bentoff states, we have a quote, "This is occurring at a very long wavelength of about 40,000 kilometers, or just about the perimeter of the planet. In other words, the signal from the movement of our bodies will travel around the world in about 1/7 of a second through the electrostatic field in which we are embedded. Such a long wavelength knows no obstacles, and its strength does not attenuate much over large distances. Naturally, it will go through just about anything: metal, concrete, water, and the fields making up our bodies. It is the ideal medium for conveying a telepathic signal." End quote. Consequently, the gateway process is designed to rather rapidly induce a state of profound calm within the nervous system and to significantly lower blood pressure to cause the circulatory system, skeleton, and all other physical organ systems to begin vibrating coherently at approximately 7 to 7.5 cycles per second. The resulting resonance sets up a regular, repetitive sound wave which propagates in consonance with the electrostatic field of the Earth. That really makes me question, geoengineering, weather modification, the negative and positive ionospheric heaters that are used by HAARP, and how these, whether intentional or not, and I believe it to be intentional, personally, whether intentional or not, it's clear that those things would have, based on just research of parapsychology, telepathy, and ESP, it's clear that those things would have an effect on our bodies. And that would, with current issues that more people are familiar with, radio, microwave, VLF, VHF, EMF, EEG, EKG, and 5G, 2G specifically, which I think we can, let me just tangent here. Let's see if it's in here. I think we actually have to look for millimeter wave. Millimeter wave technology and systems application. The effect of millimeter waves on microflora and room air. High temperature dielectrometer for centimeter and millimeter waves. Subsonic, supersonic waves. The sine wave test equipment. Evaluation of the sine wave test equipment, or SIN wave, or scene wave. An ultra short wave radio station for remote news reporting. So, labor hygiene and the biological action of radio frequency electromagnetic waves. So these documents here, generation of decimeter and centimeter waves. Without even looking up VLF, VHF, electromagnetic radiation. Let's go ahead and let's check that one out too, right? Let's look at did I? Okay. Effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. Effects of the same thing. The worker's state of health under long-term exposure to electromagnetic radiation in the VHF band. Effects of electromagnetic radiation on blood proteins. So remember that they have to create these devices. So this was, a manuscript was received in 1974. So I've read through this one already, or one that's similar to it, and excluding light from the spectrum and just looking at looking at waves that we can't see, it's enough. There's enough in this CIA declassified library, this reading room of declassified research and papers. There's enough research to show that, in fact, everything from making our blood boil to killing our sperm count to confusing people and or inciting rage or anger, as well as pacifying people, can be done. And these are papers from the 60s and 70s. I see a lot of people online who say they're electricians, and it doesn't mean that what you know is incorrect. It just means it's incomplete, that you don't have the full scope of knowledge behind the devices that people are paid to put up on street corners, or along highways. There are patents that can be found online through Google patent search. And I think it's just patents.google.com. Is that it? Okay, so Google patents, and let's look at brain entrainment. Brain entrainment method. Pressure apparatus relief for brain. Look at this icon here. Passive resonator and method of use of brainwave entrainment. Now, I'm not going to go into these patents. Everybody can look that stuff up. And again, I'm not trying to excite anybody. I think we're beyond that. The fact that I'm even talking about this stuff means, someone's watching to see what happens. Entrainment in the biomusicological sense refers to the synchronization of organisms to an external perceived rhythm, such as human music and dance. Humans are the only species for which all individuals experience entrainment, although they are documented examples of entrainment in non-human individuals. So understand what that means. That's a hive mind that can be forced upon people and be monitored or induced and reduced. This is the labor hygiene document. We know that intense change occurs in time in molecular compounds due to fluctuating breakage of molecular bonds. This paper derives formulas permitting computation of the lifespan of molecular compounds as limited by the process of their decomposition associated with thermal fluctuations. It is shown that high-intensity SHF, super high-frequency radiation, can significantly reduce lifespan of molecular compounds by its action. Evaluations are presented using substances containing bond water molecules as an example. So as we've seen, or rather heard and read in one document where one parapsychological specialist was able to seemingly kill a rat or kill a mouse and force it to die by ceasing its brain activity or stopping its heart. And that's just with the power of the mind. And we know that these patents exist. What's actually going on? What's going on? What would fanatics and people who don't want you figuring out what they're doing through personal insight or a dream or there's the term pre-crime that's sort of popping up now based off of a popular movie, or I think it was popular, called Minority Report. And, it's almost like they're inverting what we were able to do to them. and that was to pre-crime or catch a false flag or figure out that they were lying to us with some specific agenda, or figure out the agenda, or in other cases figure out an object, or any number of things. It doesn't take paranoia. It just takes logic and reason to see what would happen. Oops, that's a typo. Let's see. So I want to move this into the creative aspect of our life. And when I say creative, that's interesting. I want to reference movies and writers and artists and poets and comic book illustrators and editors and people who, musicians, video makers. Based on this input and what we've learned here, it goes without any real stretch of the imagination to presume that it's possible that someone could inadvertently expose government secrets in a movie just by collectively organizing with their team of writers or their team of directors or their team of visual artists and think that what they're receiving is inspiration in their stage of twilight, which is actually how it's referenced in more esoteric and ancient texts. It's the twilight language and the twilight phase. You'll hear people say that media is controlled and Hollywood is controlled, and I don't doubt that. But look at just think about how that control is actually working. It's always an effort to lead the horse to the water, because the horse may figure out a different path, and on that path it may discover a bunch of other things it didn't know existed, like more water or more food or secrets that are being kept from people. And I think that influence, there is a declassified document, which I was going to look for in here, which shows how many movies have been, I guess, facilitated or co-written or produced with government oversight, specifically military oversight. And while that is also an agenda towards driving people to be, to be more receptive to the growth of the military and going into wars and accepting new technologies. I mean, a movie is if that type of movie, if you're watching that type of movie, that is no different. It's a 2-hour version of a 30-second commercial, right? Because advertising is the same thing. It's designed, having worked in the industry myself, it's designed to just make you interested in something and get your attention. And in some cases, what you might call pre-programming. I might have called it a teaser campaign, but it's in another way of referencing it. You could easily call it pre-programming. And I would be lying if I didn't say I think some enterprise surrounded around marketing has to exist in order for us to prosper as a capitalistic society. However, I don't think the way search engines are working now is the best method. In fact, we see that it's limited people's options for choice, not broadened them, and it hasn't really broadened the storefront's capability, the small business owner's capability, either, other than to, if anything, really just force them into a new paradigm. What's happened is that internet, that version of the internet, that layer of the internet is basically just another yellow book or another phone book. And it's very expensive. It's much more expensive than a phone book. At least with the phone book, you owned it for a year or two, maybe 3 years, 4 years, depending on how large your community was growing. And you weren't really the option was yours to turn the page and which page to go to. And the business's option was either to pay for the placement or not pay for it. And here we don't have that. We don't have that online. It's all programming. And that programming is also in a way geared towards pushing people who are online searching for ideas and questions and answers. It pushes them away from the more natural aptitude that people experience, or the more empirical research aspect of learning on your own at your own pace, and instead has literally mitigated the decision of the one individual to be sublimated, using their own word, sublimated into the hive of the majority. And anyone who's started their own business or been in marketing or advertising long enough, you recognize that the majority isn't always right, and often that becomes a mob. So, statistical and psychological research, you'll hear that those are the least qualified people to be dictating the majority in the first place. So we have a very laborious system for the individual to both recognize their own potential, grow through their own potential, and whether that potential be telepathy, ESP, or just building a family and a business. We have some serious problems with some of the people who are guiding that process. And you could say, well, it's up to you. It's not. It hasn't been up to us. It hasn't been up to the individual. And it's not even like it's a group effort where you have to just, maybe you have to go to a town hall or a community meeting and say, look, I want to open up a business. What do you guys think? Or, I want to open up a business. What do you guys need? I mean, those are basically the two avenues that would work. But we don't have that here. That's not what's going on. We have literal technology that has divided people and is designed to divide people when necessary, as well as force them to be accepting of new things as well. And these are on literally on our doorstep. They're literally on our doorstep in our house. And I experience the issues with this stuff often. I can walk by these 5G PEDs and 5G nodes and immediately feel the sensation on my skin. The other issue is I've been a user experience designer working on interfaces for a long time, and I recognize what was called dark user patterns, or dark UI patterns, user interface patterns, where they were almost forced to confuse, where they're basically designed to force someone to get confused, and they either eventually exit or they buy things they don't need. They inadvertently spend $1 here, $1 there. It's sort of the same. It's like the same thing that the telecom companies do, where you end up with these charges, and if you just don't look at your bill every stinking time, if you don't look at the bill every month, you're going to have a $4 charge for something new or a $10 charge somewhere else, and you'll have no notification of it. So whatever's actually going on entirely here, at the best and the worst, I think it's reasonable to say that we're watching the ability for a few controllers to either divide or congregate people at will, based on on whatever agenda is going on. And if you want to go in and say, well, look, mobs are crazy and this and that, I'm like, yeah, that's true. I mean, I've always stayed away from large groups and mobs, and I've never been one to congregate when I see violence or feel like violence may erupt in a situation. However, I have been one of those violent people due to other circumstances. I've also been someone who's tried to pacify situations, so I know that there are very specific idiosyncratic reasons that these things may occur. But I have to wonder how much of that was my choice or my free will, let alone the people who I was either leading or people that I was following. And this isn't, again, I hope this doesn't depress anybody. That's not what this really is. I think one thing that should be really remarkable and amazing is just to recognize that this is real. The ability, the talent, the potential, and most likely everyone has the ability to try it, and everybody has done it at one time or another. So whether or not you believe it to be God's gift or a evolution of your biology, or your own personal ascension, that it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to say that everybody has the potential, and that's a highly positive sign. And then on the opposite end of that, we know that with any new technology, it's almost instantly abused first. Almost all of it. Anything I've ever introduced into the marketplace, whether it be a website or an app, or even I have some products myself that I build and make, and I even do it myself. The first thing I do is I look for the weaknesses. Where's it going? I drop it, I throw it, I hit it with something, I do all kinds of stuff with it just to see how it's going to react. And where it's stress point, it's called a stress test, basically. It's kind of like car companies doing crumple zone testing and then sending the car into a wall at 80 miles an hour. But these weapons, which I think they are, I don't think that that's what this is. I think these are people who knew it, anticipated it. I think there was probably a time when we were more connected. I don't know how long ago that was and how often that was, but that connection is seemingly being destroyed for artificial dependency in what is, a matrix lifestyle or a hive mind mentality. And I think that we have to. I don't know how anybody could rise above. I don't know how anybody, once you recognize that, once you're surrounded by this stuff, what do? Move out to the woods, and then you got no one to connect with? Or then what are you going to do? Remote view a squirrel, see what the squirrel's doing? That could be fun, but then I'd rather just go sit out by the actual tree and wait for the squirrel to go do its thing so I could watch it in real time. The only other thing I could think of is that there's just more secrets that we're not aware of, and many of those secrets would have to be wrapped up in something like a black budget or a black project or things like that. I'm going to close this off in a couple minutes and stop at energy entrainment or consciousness of energy here. But I want to add something to my creative statement before about creativity. I've worked around a lot of creative people, and I've been forced to really just squeeze out as many possible ideas as I could on many different aspects of my knowledge sets as it related to both my job and my life. Just really churn and burn and improvise and survive. It's always been my belief that everyone is creative. After many years of going sort of through the various aspects of marketing and advertising and creativity, and being a fine artist myself for a short time, you learn quickly that it doesn't take a lot to tap into someone's own abilities, and you soon start to you purposefully start to let go of the wheel and see if this person can hold on to it a little bit. And when you do, and when they do, you really are surprised and complimented with something really nice. In other cases, you might have to be the person that whittles away these people's preconceptions and their pre-programming in order for them to arrive at something a little bit more pure and a little bit more original and not predicated on their programming. But the notion here, and where I'm going, is that you could say, well, a lot of creative people are pulling their ideas from the ether, the collective consciousness, the whatever. And from my experience, I'm actually going to say that that's not true. I think that the individual person has such capability and so much ability to synthesize something original. The problem is that anytime you introduce that to the wrong people, that same ability to synthesize something almost instantly, either in your head or on paper as a drawing, which is really the true skill set. You don't even need to be able to build things. If you can draw well and articulate your thoughts with a ruler and a compass, or a paintbrush in such a way that it reveals what you want to make or build, or how your idea is manifested. That right there, that same ability exists inversely in other people, and they can literally deconstruct what you've done, even if it hasn't been built yet. But they can deconstruct it and copy it and refine it and add to it. And these are actually part of the sacred arts that I was talking to. These are all taught there. If you can think and draw at the same time, that's a highly valuable skill set for all of these people. I mean, that's what really drives all the media and content in the world, is people who are able to manifest their thoughts and words into believable imagery, and whether you're an artist, a painter, a musician, or whatever, it thrives on us. It thrives on those people. Nothing exists without someone who knows how to make something. And with that said, I would say that people who don't think they're creative are most likely creative, and I don't want to use the word artist as a label for just a specific group. Everyone's an artist in some fashion or another. Anybody that has to solve a problem, whether it's a politician or a writer or a mechanic, you are synthesizing something new from an existing set of variables. And whether or not your artistic work and merit is represented in a $200 bill for a car or a $500 bill for a piece of artwork is irrelevant. Everybody's exercising the same gifts and the same skill sets. But the people that are going to copy it and steal and or invert that to make sure it doesn't happen, right? The invariable problem with any sort of clairvoyance, especially when it comes from an artist who sees the future as they try to maybe develop an idea or a concept of their own, is that you're inadvertently also providing somebody the exact template to keep you from being able to do that. Any prospect or prospective brief or story or script or draft or master plan of a community is also explicitly the easiest way to discover the weakness and to keep any of that from happening. So any forecasting, any future forecasting, anytime you expound those ideas, there is a large group of people, and I'm going to close this here, there's a large group of people who will work to keep that from happening, because the people that can rapidly prototype their world around them, who can rapidly produce, and I don't mean radio or podcasts or TV shows, because that's actually, no matter how profound that content is, it's disposable. I'm talking about someone who might create a new wheelchair, or someone who can figure out, a defensive device against all this kind of stuff, right? Those people, there's no privacy in that realm, in that you have to reveal so much up front in order to get any help from anyone else. You're either forced into a hermit stage where you have to make something solely for yourself, and anytime you share it with anybody, one, it's going to be misunderstood and most likely shot down, because it hasn't been slowly introduced into their consciousness like all the pre-programming is. And two, usually when you go into any funding round or business partnership or loan request or anything like that, you have to give a lot of information up front. So you're already exposing weaknesses and exposing yourself. So again, this isn't to scare anybody. It's really more of a level-headed strategic plan. I don't know what the outcome is with relation to all that stuff. I do know that the individual is equally as capable of manifesting their own ideas as the group. And what I've seen these days is a more communist, socialist approach, where anyone who tries to work on their own is shot down. Or anyone who has an exact vision of their own, who can literally do the exploded view. You watch all the parts come together in your brain, and you're just like, I got it. I know what I'm going to do. I think there's two closing points on all of this, is that you have to know how to communicate that well with people. So you have to know the arts, either the visual arts, the language arts, rhetoric, telepathy, a little bit of ESP, a little bit of bonding ability, that kind of stuff. And two, you have to, or B, you have to recognize that people are going to chomp and bite at it and tear it apart. And when it comes out at the end, some of those people had their own personal agenda in that process, and some of those people had no idea what they were doing. So when it comes out of that meat grinder, and you want to look at what you were envisioning through the lens of all the people you've had to, maybe been forced to collaborate with, it's just as much a destructive process too, and that's a weak point as well. So I guess that's it for now. I could read on with consciousness energy, but I don't want to make this too long. And again, go to the Crest Library, check all this stuff out. You can find all of this on your own. The biggest setback you'll find is just figuring out the language they've used as opposed to what language you're hearing now, and that's deliberate as well. It makes obfuscation very easy when terminology changes and taxonomy changes and the lexicon changes and the jargon changes, and you may not have an academic background with a specific thing that you want to search, so you don't even know how to ask the right question into the query field. And you can look this all up on your own. And then when you're done with that, just take some of the phrases that you see in here and some of the data points and all that, and start searching around using those on DuckDuckGo or Google or whatever search engine you favor. And you'll start to uncover a lot of interesting stuff. So, all right, have a good night, and I mean that sincerely.